Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in today. I am Jutta Hochkamp and I'm sitting in the studio at École Couture, School of Couture Sewing and Design. What I want to talk about today is a follow-up on a video that I did about this thing called size. So if you check in our playlist, you'll find it. And I talked about how we tend to compare ourselves with magazine images that are impossible to live up to, and how that causes us a certain amount of stress. And why does it cause us stress? When we go to the shops to buy clothing, whether it's a second-hand shop, vintage, or brand new, I guess our eye is first drawn to the actual garment. The next thing we do, we look at the sizing on it and say, now is this a possibility? Is it worthwhile trying on or not? So if it fits within your size range, you will try it on. The stressful part comes when the perception of a size and the garment and fitting it on, they don't match, they don't marry up. There's something off about it, and then we start to blame ourselves because perhaps we are larger than the size, smaller than the size, or we blame the garment for being missized. All valid points. But we have to remember that all of these garments are produced on a production line, unless they are couture made. For production line garments, I just want to back up a little bit and just go through how they're made. So production line means that there's a division of labor where one person will do one thing and then hand it off, and it goes down the line to the end of the production line. And you need to make many, many units of a particular product to make a profit at the end, because production lines are very expensive to set up. There's labor costs, there's material costs, which is low on the scale really, but labor costs, material costs, and overheads, and all kinds of things you have to pay for. So at the end, the profit margin is probably very small, although it's become larger over the years, we know. So the other thing about making many, many units is they all have to be the same. Otherwise, what is the point? And the more often you do something of a similar task, the better at it you get and the faster it goes, and so on. Okay, so backing up a little bit further, first of all, they had to create a pattern of the garment that they used to cut fabric out with before they can construct it. To make that pattern, though, they needed to have some kind of standardization of that represents the general public. So what they did is they standardized that using analysis of great numbers of measurements that they averaged out over time. So they used large numbers of people, and they found commonalities between people and their measurements, relationships between, for women it would be bust to waist to hip. And that's what they based their sizes on. For creating one size up or one size down, they didn't look for people who were one size up or one size down. They looked for the differences in the commonalities, and they came up with increments that seemed to work, generally speaking. So we take a pattern and we either grade it up or grade it down, which means you're sizing it up or sizing it down. Now, that worked to clothe the general public reasonably well. Now, the thing about standard sizes, too, is that they have changed over the decades. The way that we looked 40 years ago is not the same way that we look now. Our sizes have changed, and they certainly aren't the same as they were 50 or 60 years ago. Plus, the other consideration is what undergarments we're wearing. It does change how the top garment actually hangs on you or fits you. So not only did the standardized sizes change over time, and the standardized sizes were for masses of people, not individuals, we have changed what we look like over years. Perhaps we're a little bit heavier now than we used to be. Perhaps we're more fit now than we used to be. It all depends. And every brand of clothing will adopt a certain standard of measurement. Now they don't vary all that much, or they didn't until recently, where now the brand size may be completely different from one to the next, where perhaps you're a size 2 in one brand and you're a size 4 in another brand. But what those sizes mean and what they're for, in fact, is for production. They have nothing to do nothing to do with you and I. It's for production purposes. Now, that very first pattern that they design is the one that costs all the money to produce. It's the design, it's the development of the design. Once they have that, they can run with it and make many, many copies of it. But the prototype, the very first one, is where they spend all of their time and invest their money in. Okay, so along came laser technology, which can scan the body from all angles, and it takes in thousands and thousands of pieces of information, and it tabulates that, and it will create a design, which has helped in mass production immensely. But it's not something that's available to everyone. I mean, it's very expensive, and only large manufacturers can afford that, or very prominent designers can afford it. So that was a great boon for the production industry. Okay, so getting back to standard sizes, they're meant for large groups of people to make sure that these garments fit reasonably well. They don't fit anybody perfectly well, or if it is, it's a very small percentage. Now, how is couture different? We take many, many measurements, and to start out with, we take as many as 60 different measurements for every client, and we put that on record. Now, that may not be all the measurements that we take. We might take extra measurements for a particular design. The other thing that we take into consideration is the shape of your body. Everybody's shape and relationship of parts to that shape is different, and your posture is different, and there might be some irregularities in your shape. Perhaps you've got a dropped shoulder, you play the guitar perhaps, or perhaps you had a broken shoulder at one time, things like that. We take all of that into consideration. And age is another factor. People can have the same measurements, but with slight alterations, the clothing will have to be made differently to make it fit properly. So we also take mobility into consideration, or limitations in mobility. Perhaps we're making a garment for somebody who's totally fit and mobile, and that's great. That's something that we should all be happy with. But what about those people who have problems reaching back and closing things up behind them, or perhaps they can't even stand anymore? They need to put clothing on while they're sitting. So all of these things we take into consideration before we even draft a pattern. Now, the other thing is, and I just touched on this a minute ago, is movement. Even for someone who is basically fit and young, even if you take a scan of the body, it's in one position. It doesn't take into account what that garment feels like when you're wearing it. So during the fittings that we do, we also adjust the garment, or the toile or the muslin fitting, to make sure that it is comfortable while you're wearing it, or that it functions properly, and we make all of the adjustments. So in summary, couture is very, very personal. It's highly detailed. We draft everything by hand. We take the measurements by hand. There is no machine, there is no computer that can replace the skills that we employ every day in what we do. So our tools are our hands, our eyes, and our mind. And after all, even humans, they are the ones who will program a computer program. So I hope that helps to clarify a little bit the difference about standardized sizing and what we do in couture. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope it's clarified somewhat the difference between ready-made sizes and couture, and why size does not matter in couture. Size does not matter. You are the perfect size.